Romo?
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Hey, what's up internet? My name is Nikki and today I will be doing a horror movie recommendation. So next Monday will be Halloween and the end of October. I decided to do my own little recommendation of horror movies because I like horror movies. I like to watch them all year round, but on October, it's the only one time you can actually record stuff on your DVR that will be on TV. So I figured why not share some of my favorite horror movies, and so I made a little list of horror movies that I like due to their subgenres. And subgenres of horror are categorized in 7 subgenres, which I will get into later on. But disclaimer is that some of these movies might not be that scary, but then again, they are movies that I like and they're just recommendations to you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy it and let's get into it. So the first sub-movie genre is monster flicks, are categorized under when a leading character is put against a supernatural-like creature or the leading character themselves are actually turned into a supernatural-like creature. So the first movie I recommend is a 1997 horror movie, An American Werewolf in Paris. I like this movie because it gave me the love of werewolves. Ever since I've seen this movie, I have been obsessed with werewolves. So the movie is about a trio of American backpacking through Europe. They're actually thrill-seeking, and so when they end up coming to Paris, they decide to bungee jump off of the Eiffel Tower. While they're trying to bungee jump off of the Eiffel Tower, there's actually a young girl there who actually is trying to commit suicide, and she tries to jump off of the Eiffel Tower, but they save her because, well, they were bungee jumping and they caught her. And so while doing this, they end up involving themselves into the secret society of werewolves, and then one of them ends up getting bitten by a werewolf and is turning into a werewolf himself. He and this girl are trying to reverse the effects of them being werewolves and also stop the secret society of werewolves from getting their hands on a serum that basically lets them change into a werewolf anytime they want. My second recommendation for Monsters Flicks has to be the 1987 movie Lost Boys. Has to be like a cult classic of movies, and basically what it's about is a mother and her 2 sons end up moving to a small coast California town where they discover that it is a haven for vampires. It's basically up to the 2 sons to save their mother and try to get out of this small town before they themselves become either vampires or vampire snacks. In my opinion, the most popular monster flicks have to be the black and white monster flicks, going from Dracula, Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, and of course my favorite of them all, Creature of the Black Lagoon. I like the old classic ones in black and white. I don't know what it is. I do admit they're kind of slow, but if you haven't seen them, I say give it a try because they're mostly story based and they are like action-y kind of monster flicks like the other 2, but they're still really good just because of how the story flows. So give it a try and tell me what you thought about it. Next subgenre is paranormal / occult horror movies. These movies are categories under when the main antagonist is supernatural force entity that you cannot see with the naked eye, essentially. My first recommendation has to be the 2010 Insidious movie. Insidious is about a family who's trying to protect their comatose son from being possessed by evil spirits. They're trying everything they can do to bring him back to his body, trying to protect him from all the bad things that's currently happening to him. So my second recommendation has to be the 2013 The Conjuring movie. This movie is based on true events. It's based on 2 real people, and the movie is about the paranormal investigators of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who work to help a family who are being terrorized by dark forces. And it's a really good movie. It gives you a little backstory of the first ever paranormal investigators who actually became popular, which are the Warrens. And in my opinion, the most popular paranormal / occult movie has to be the 1973 movie The Exorcist. This movie to this day still scares me shitless. I am terrified of this movie. No, if I hear like the theme music to this movie, I freak out. This movie freaked me out just because of what it's based on. It's based on a teenage girl who ends up getting possessed by the devil. And the reason I think it scares me has to be due because of how much the mother's trying to protect her daughter but cannot do a single thing to help her, so she ends up hiring 2 priests to do an exorcism on her and try to save her soul, and it's just a really scary movie. Next subgenre is found footage. I think this is kind of obvious what found footage is about, but I'm just gonna tell you anyways. So found footage horror movies are primarily or wholly portrayed with footage that was literally taken or later found by someone else. My first recommendation has to be the 2012 horror movie Sinister. So Sinister is about a washed up true crime novelist who ends up finding a box of Super 8 homemade videos. It suggests that the murders that he has been researching might actually be connected to a serial killer that started in the 1960s. My second recommendation has to be the 2012 horror movie VHS. Basically what this movie is about, it's about a group of guys who go around filming their crimes, and so one day they end up getting hired to actually rob a house and find a certain VHS tape. But the thing is, they don't actually know what's on this VHS tape, so when they end up entering this house, they realize that this house has more than one VHS tape, so they end up deciding to just start watching through these movies and see which one might be the one that they got hired to find. So they start watching these VHS tapes to see which one it is, only to find out that they are actually stranger than what it actually is. It's just a bunch of homemade films of people killing each other and monster-like creatures coming after people, and it's just really creepy because it gives you the sense that while you're watching these VHS tapes, any of these monsters that they're currently watching might actually come after them, so it's just like really freaky. And so in my opinion, the most popular found footage movie has to be the 1999 movie The Blair Witch Project. The reason I say this is because when it first came out, a lot of people believed this was real and they were really freaked out. And I remember on the news you would hear like a lot of people were sending like the actors' parents like letters of saying like, we're sorry about your kids and all that stuff, and it just freaked a lot of people out. So the Blair Witch Project is about 3 film students who end up going to Maryland to do a documentary on the Blair Witch. So they go into the woods where she supposedly lives, and basically while they're there they get tormented by the Blair Witch, and it just shows footage of them just being scared all the time. Next subgenre is survival movies. So survivor movies are based around the main protagonist or a group of lead characters who have to overcome a potential fatal threat. Straight off the bat, I just want to say that when I think of survival horror movies, the only type I actually think of that come to my head are movies that involve some form of zombies. I know there's like a lot of other genres of movies I could have chose, but zombie movies are kind of like my main thing that's in my head that I like. So my first recommendation for survival movies has to be the Resident Evil franchise. And I know a lot of people don't like these movies, but I personally do, especially the 2002, the Resident Evil one that started it all. So Resident Evil is basically about a special military unit that ends up going down to the Hive, which is this underground secret laboratory. And they go there just because it shuts down. And while they're trying to get communication to the Hive, there's no real response, only from the supercomputer that basically keeps repeating that it is shut down and that something is wrong. So their job is to go down, figure out what happened, reboot the supercomputer, and basically find survivors. But once they get there, they found out that everyone that was there has been mutated into flesh-eating creatures. My second recommendation is the 2002 movie 28 Days Later. 4 weeks after a mysterious uncurable virus spreads through the UK, a handful of survivors end up trying to find salvation. I really liked it, and if you kind of like The Walking Dead, you might actually like 28 Days Later because it starts off just like how The Walking Dead starts off, with someone waking up in a hospital and it's basically empty. And the most popular survival horror movie, in my opinion, 1978 George A. Romano's Dawn of the Dead. Basically, the movie starts off with dead rising from the dead, becoming flesh-eating zombies. We follow the lives of a handful of people who seek refuge in a shopping mall. And it was really good for its time, and it started a whole genre of what zombie-like movies should be like. Next subgenre is psychological / thrillers. So I know thrillers are its own genre, but sometimes psychological horror and psychological thrillers actually blur the line of which is which. It's heavily relied on the impending doom of danger. Like something is about to happen, but you just have the fear that something bad is about to happen. You don't know when, and you just have to wait until it does. My first recommendation has to be in the 1980s Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. He adapted this from a Stephen King story, but let's admit that movie has nothing to do with Stephen King's story whatsoever. So it follows Jack Torrance and his family after he gets a job on the Occult Hotel to take care of it during the winter. And basically he likes the idea of taking care of this hotel because he is an aspiring writer and he thinks that staying there in isolation might actually help him write his next novel. But that's not quite the case for Jack. Cabin fever starts to set in for Jack and it just turns to homicidal tendencies, and it just gets really scary from there because it's like a buildup that they have been in this hotel isolated for such a long time that they're starting to see things and hear things. And I suggest it, or you could read Stephen King's version of it because either which one of them are actually really good. My second recommendation has to be the 1997 horror flick Cube. It's about 6 strangers who involuntarily were placed in an endless maze containing deadly traps shaped as the cubes. So in my opinion, the most popular psychological movie has to be the 1960s Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. This movie is really good. It is a classic and it's a must watch. So basically what ends up going down is a secretary actually ends up embezzling money from her boss, then goes on the run. Her car ends up breaking down next to the Bates Motel. She actually checks into the Bates Motel, just hide out there until things calm down. But things at the Bates Motel are not what they seem, and just a lot of crazy stuff happens. If you haven't seen this movie, my question is why? Because it's really good, and there's like a lot of different movies and things that give reference to this movie. So if you haven't already, why haven't you? The next subgenre is Splatter Flicks. This is like my least favorite genre of all horror movies because it freaked me out too much. So basically what Splatter Flicks are focuses on the graphic nature of a character's death or mutilation / torture using special effects. Well, I hope using special effects, and it's just really gory. It's just really gross. My first recommendation is the Hostel franchise, starting off with the 2005 movie Hostel Part 1. So this movie follows 3 American backpackers who are basically going through Europe, staying at hostels and indulging in sex, drugs, and alcohol and just having the time of their lives. One day they are told about a certain hostel that has all of these, and it's basically a carefree place where all the girls, I guess, are beautiful and they could have the time of their lives. When they get to the certain hostel somewhere in Europe, they end up finding out that they have been sold to a sadistic group of hunters who basically like to hunt and mutilate human beings for the fun of it. So it's just really graphic and really nasty, and if you're really into splatter flicks, I suggest it. And if you haven't heard about Hostel, I will be kind of surprised. And it was really popular back in the day. My second recommendation has to be the Saw franchise itself, starting off with the first one that came out in 2004. The basis of Saw is basically a serial killer ends up kidnapping 2 people. They are trapped in a room and they try to piece together what is happening to them. They find out that they have been kidnapped by this notorious serial killer who likes to play games. So to get out of the situation they are in, they must claim the rules of the serial killer. So in my opinion, the most popular splatter flick has to be the 1981 The Evil Dead. Basically, this movie revolves around 5 friends that go to a cabin in the woods. Yeah, you see where this is going. And then they unknowingly unleash a flesh-eating demon. And it's just really gory, and if you're into that, go for it. Also, it has raping trees, so the last subgenre is my favorite of them all, and that is slasher flicks. I am obsessed with slasher flicks. I don't know why, but I just am. Slasher flick centers around a killer that picks off their victims in a brutal or gory fashion. And usually it's by one or all at the same time, depending on what kind of slasher movie you're kind of watching. And for this, I choose the holy trinity in my eyes of slasher films, starting off with the Halloween franchise. So Halloween is centered around Michael Myers. When he was 6 years old, he ended up stabbing his sister to death on Halloween night. They end up sending him to mental hospital, and there he stays for about 15 years until he decides to break out and go back home and starts killing teenagers around Halloween time. And this movie has a lot of different sequels to it, and you could just watch it, and I like it just because it is the old-fashioned serial killer. He doesn't run, he doesn't basically do anything, he just appears there. He walks, and it's just really interesting to see it back nowadays and go like, seriously? But it's still a really good slasher flick. My second recommendation of the Holy Trinity is Friday the 13th franchise. The story starts off with people trying to reopen Camp Crystal Lake after an incident that happened a few years ago where a child ended up drowning. They started opening up Camp Crystal Lake, trying to say that it is safe again, but unknowingly the camp counselors that are there are being picked off one by one, being accused of the murder of this boy. And I really enjoyed it, and it's just really interesting, especially the other sequels, because one of the sequels end up sending him to space, which I think is pretty funny. And last but not least of the Holy Trinity is A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. This is like my favorite of all slasher films. I have seen every single one multiple times. I've seen the remake multiple times. I am just in love with this franchise in itself. So how it starts off is a group of teenagers are tormented by a claw-like killer that ends up killing them in their dreams. And it's just one of those movies that kind of gets you because you are not safe in your own head, let alone while you're awake. And I like it just because I like this kind of slasher films, especially the 1984 film that actually started Johnny Depp's career, if you did not know that. So that is it for my recommendation of horror films. I hope you enjoyed it. I personally liked sharing with you guys what movies that I like to watch during this time. I hope you guys end up watching some of these films, and if you guys do end up watching these films, tell me what you guys thought. Also, I would have put on this list every single category. I would have put like a Stephen King adapted movie, but I had to mix it up a little bit. So yeah, anyways, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please subscribe. If not, that's cool. I try to upload Monday, Wednesdays, or Fridays, and I catch you later. Wah-bam.